Trying to be sure this is on. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the museum on behalf of the Highpoint Historical Society. We are really pleased to have Benjamin Briggs here to speak to us today. And if you don't know, this is Benjamin's books for sale in the bookstore. This is a great, great treasure to Highpoint that Benjamin did this. Benjamin's family goes back to the 1880s in High Point, so he is really part of the fabric. His family's part of the fabric of High Point, and we're glad he's here. And Benjamin has been with Preservation Greensboro and is now leading Preservation North Carolina. So I feel like High Point has a gem that we can call whenever we need it. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you. Testing. And a friendly reminder, I was with the High Point Preservation Society too, before PNC and High Point Preservation Commission, and I was on the board of the High Point Museum for several years in the early 90s, which was what, 35 years ago now? 30 years ago. So, I'm very proud of my hometown, High Point, and glad to represent the city on the statewide level. And there's something about the water in High Point, the area. Ruth Coltrane Cannon, the pioneering preservationist who lived moved to Concord. She was from northern Randolph County. She's my second cousin, 3 times removed. I'm a Coltrane. My great grandmother was a Coltrane, and we have David Blair from the Springfield community, and we have many representatives. Mr. Bivens with the museum here, John Bivens, who was employed by the High Point Historical Museum as well back in the late 60s, early 70s when Haley House was being considered for restoration. So here I am, and it's wonderful to be here, even though outside is like Seattle today, which I don't mind as much. So I want you to know that Preservation North Carolina was established in 1939. We're among one of the oldest statewide organizations really in the country. So we don't rival Historic New England, which I'll always remember as SPNEA, the Society of Preservation New England Antiquities, SPNEA. But Virginia, rivaled them, Philadelphia, Charleston. So that's something to be proud of. And our mission is to protect and promote the buildings, the landscapes, and the sites that are important to the diverse heritage of North Carolina. So that opens us up to a broad arena, a broad selection of properties and histories and narratives that we can be involved in preserving. So when we talk about sites that we want to preserve, we can think of here in High Point, one of my favorite houses, the Terry and Peggy Harper house out on Greensboro Road across from Maryfield. As a kid, my dad was from High Point. His mother was actually friends with, my grandmother was friends with Peggy Harper. He always called that the murder house. He's like, there's the house that the murder took place in. Peggy was Terry was a shoe salesman out on the road. Terry was having a relationship with one of the local boys in Jamestown, and he ended up getting shot and killed in the living room. And there was a big sensational trial, and Peggy was from Chicago, and the newspapers called her, Chicago Peggy, and it was quite lurid and everything. And for Terry was set free for murder because of the passions that were inflamed by his wife having an affair. And Terry and Peggy remained married. After all that happened, they stayed married. They moved out of High Point. But these are all the stories of place that are so important to me. But it is a fantastic house. And I hold that up there. I think you all would agree that's an historic place, right? Moroccan architecture, fantastic story, narrative, High Point history, right? So what about this building? Is this historic? So One Plaza Center on South Main Street, finished in 1973, 1974. Is that historic?
Yeah.
So this building is now on the National Register of Historic Places. It was added last month, officially inscribed to the National Register. It is important because it represents an important chapter in American history with modernism, urban renewal in the 60s and 70s. It's an excellent example of brutalism. Architect was J.N. Pease and Associates out of Charlotte, very progressive architect. So this on the National Register, this not on the National Register. I think as a nonprofit organization on the statewide level that it's upon me to open the door to what is historic and to be more inviting and engaging and to make people aware that we're reinventing our what is historic preservation and opening and being more inclusive in that title. So in working with historic properties, we seek to protect historic properties. So, and we are lucky in North Carolina to have many different tools available to us to protect properties, right? So the National Register is a designation that is an honor. It also allows for buildings like One Plaza Center on Main Street to participate in historic tax credits that are available on the national level through the Park Service and also on the state level, which makes those properties more lucrative and more able to be preserved. So, however, and I will also say local historic district, of which we now have 4 or 5 in High Point. We have Johnson Street, we have Sherrod Park, we have High Street, and we now have Washington Street, and so that's 4, right? High, Washington, Johnson, and Sherrod Park. So I think Oakwood was never, Oakwood Street was never put on. Right? So, okay, so we have 4, which is one more than Greensboro, just saying. Historic district regulates the exterior appearance of buildings. It can, so if you want to put an addition on your house, then you need to get permission through an approval, certificate of appropriateness, approval through your the High Point Preservation Commission. But that being said, you can still demolish the building, right? After 365 days of a delay, you can still demolish buildings. National Register buildings can be demolished. Local landmarks, of which we now are approaching 115 in Guilford County. The J. Chathams Inn is an example of a local landmark property. The Elihu and Abigail Mendenhall house up on Ski Club Road is a local landmark. Remember when Publix wanted to build out on that site and they were delayed? And that delay did exactly what it was meant to do. It bought us a little time to calm down and talk and to try to figure out an alternative. And in this case, the alternative was that Publix not going to build on that site. So, however, it could be demolished, right? So if we're looking at all these, the Spencer Love House in Irving Park, which was a grand, beautiful James River plantation style house built in 1936, 37, that was destroyed in late February, early March. It was on the National Register. And as soon as Roy Carroll bought that house, he called up D.H. Griffin and said, come and get it. Needed no permission, approval, delays, nothing was in the way to demolish that building, and away it went. So there it is, right after it was destroyed. So I'm making you all aware of the tools. Different tools have different opportunities, and the one that Preservation North Carolina does, and does arguably better than almost any other organization in the country, is preservation easements. At this point, we're at about 896 easement properties around the state of North Carolina. Almost 900 properties around the state of North Carolina. And we've been collecting easements through our Endangered Properties Program. Some people still call it the revolving fund, but we don't use that terminology anymore. It is the Endangered Properties Program since 1977. That's among the earliest, modeled off of Historic Charleston Foundation, which took on easements throughout the city of Charleston, but Preservation North Carolina leadership changed the narrative, changed the script a little bit. Instead of just being a city, expanded it to the entire state of North Carolina. And here we are, almost 50 years later, and we're holding nearly 900 preservation easements, gathering about 1 or 2 a month. So they keep coming in, and that's okay. So what is a preservation easement? It's voluntary. So anybody can give an easement or talk to us about arranging for us to take an easement between the property owner and an easement holder, which could be Preservation North Carolina. It could be the High Point Preservation Society, which holds easements. Preservation Greensboro holds easements. Preservation Forsyth in Winston-Salem is beginning to take easements. Salisbury and Wilmington and Asheville Durham have taken easements for years and years. So you have a wonderful choice in Guilford County. In High Point, you have a choice between the local and the statewide. And really, the National Trust takes easements too, but it's a little bit on a different level. So what is the easement? The landowner is giving up sticks in a bundle of land rights. You might have heard about easements related to a Duke Energy easement across your property, or maybe you share an easement for your driveway right away with your next door neighbor. So easements are well established in American law, and they're strong. So we don't foresee any challenges to that. But it's a retention of an element of the house. Maybe it's the facade, maybe it includes the mantels and the staircase, and maybe some of the beautiful details in the living room, dining room, and front hall of your house. But the property owner retains overall ownership of the land and the house. In order to qualify for tax benefits, which are usually, we'll talk about that, then the easements must last forever. And forever is a long, long time. And additionally, for tax benefits, properties need to be a certified historic structure, which in our language is National Register or National Register eligible property. So those are what we consider certified. So when you look at the triad, you see High Point and Greensboro and Winston-Salem. All these dots represent different easement types or stewardship that we, Preservation North Carolina, retains in our region. So you can see High Point has a wonderful little cluster here that we'll talk about. Jamestown over here, one in Trinity, one in Thomasville, a little cluster in Greensboro, Eastern Guilford County, and of course Kernersville, Walburg, and in Winston-Salem there's a little cluster, and the rest are kind of sprinkled all over. This is Belmont, a house that we are trying to restore in down near Linwood. This is the Shell Station. Some of you know in Winston-Salem, the Yellow Shell Station. So I just want to show you the array, and if you were to expand this out to the entire state of North Carolina, it's a similar arrangement. Fewer properties in the far west. I want to change that. When you get out towards Cherokee and Graham County, we can do better. But it's a nice array of properties, and it's important that we have good geographic distribution. So property easements typically address the significance, the architecture, can be also archaeology of a site. It can include a private house. It can be an entire mill, like Glencoe Mill or Lowray Mill in Gastonia, or the Eatonton Cotton Mill in Eatonton. It's quite flexible, and it can be customized to protect whatever the donor and the easement holder negotiate and agree on needs to be protected. We just are putting an easement on a house in Salisbury that's modernist, and we're only doing the outside. The interior is wonderful, but it's the owner just doesn't feel comfortable with that. They want to do the outside, and that's fine. We'll do the outside. So as I say, it can be exteriors only. It can include interior elements that include gardens. What if you have a wonderful rock garden, or a walled garden, or outbuildings like barns, garages, and associated archaeological elements. The responsibility of the easement holder, that's Preservation North Carolina, and this is forever, right? That we take on the responsibility for monitoring future transactions, ownership of the property, so that we can have a good relationship with the new buyers. Our worst nightmare is, and people claim it all the time, but we try to put in safeguards, but say, I didn't know that it was historic, and that's why I tore it down. It's not happened yet, but we don't want that to happen. So we have to have good relationships with future property owners. We monitor and enforce any or any changes that are done to the building, and to do that, we build in a one-time fee at the beginning of the easement placement. So that fee varies from property to property. Smaller properties might be a smaller amount. Larger properties, like a commercial building in downtown Winston-Salem, might be a great deal of money, because those are undergoing changes all the time, especially in downtown Winston-Salem. So stewardship is ongoing. It allows for modern improvements and conveniences. Nobody wants a few people want a 1920s kitchen. I might, but might not have a place to put the ice for the ice box. But we want modern bathrooms and things. So the nice thing about easements is that it allows for a respect of the original contributing features of a building, the mantles, the staircase, the windows, things that we all fall in love with. But we're not going to cover basements and closets and even upstairs bedrooms and kitchens in some cases. We allow those to change over time. So it is a flexible tool. The benefits of an easement to a property owner is, number one, the peace of mind that the cherished property is not going to be destroyed. So when you drive down that street that you grew up on, you know that the house is going to be there, and nobody will have painted it pink with yellow polka dots. Property owners retain the right to enjoy and to improve and to bequeath and to sell the property. So it still is your house. It just has a little tag on it that requires that major changes need to get approval through Preservation of North Carolina. It assists in planning, estate planning, and ability to take an action that benefits the entire community. So when you preserve your house through an easement, you know that that's going to be part of your legacy to the community. It's preserving that property. Some tax benefits can be taken. We'll talk about that in a second. And the future of the property is no longer left to hope. I spoke to a property owner a few weeks ago in Greensboro. They were talking about the Spencer Love house, and I said, your house is just as vulnerable. And they said, I know, but I just hope when they're getting ready to sell the property, he said, I just hope somebody will do the right thing. And I said, hope doesn't work. And so they were willing to take that risk. The future is no longer left to hope. I've talked a little bit about the value of easements as far as a property tax deduction. And so just to show you, if say you had a wonderful house in High Point on some acreage, and it was valued at $50,000 for simplicity's sake. And then the value of it, part of the value is that a builder could come in and tear the house down and build a bigger house, right? And maybe 2 houses or maybe 3 houses, like in Emerywood on a large lot or out in the countryside. So the diminishment of that value from being able to do whatever you want, demolish the house, build a cul-de-sac on it. The difference, let's just say for argument's sake, is now it's worth $45,000. So the difference between those would be $5,000. And that could be considered a tax-deductible charitable contribution if your accountant feels comfortable with that. So I just throw that out there as a way to look at maybe getting some benefit financially from this. Setting up an easement is relatively easy. It's attached to the property in the Register of Deeds office, so it can be done relatively quickly. There will be some cost to the donor, like title search and appraisal and things like that. And PNC does charge a fee because this is forever that we're taking care of this. Properties can also be donated to Preservation North Carolina or bequeathed, and this happens from time to time, and we are eternally grateful. We're now working through an estate of a husband and wife who passed in Raleigh, and man, they are so appreciated. It really does save the organization. And then nice thing is when those properties leave our ownership, they have covenants and easement on the deed in perpetuity. So it is an act of generosity that are immeasurably important to the health of Preservation North Carolina. So just a quick review from Guilford County. The first easement that we had in Guilford County was 1982. Remember, the earliest easements that were accepted, I said the EPP program since 1977. So it took 5 years. So Guilford County is kind of early in the process. And this is the Latham Baker house. You might remember Maud Latham and her daughter Ruth May Gordon Kellenberger were instrumental in reconstructing Tryon Palace in New Bern, and they were Greensboro. Maud was a New Bern girl in her description, and she passed. Her daughter May picked up her mother's work and saved that. So this is the house that the family built in Fisher Park, and it was threatened with demolition in 1981. And the community did not like that idea with Brown Investments. So the compromise was that the house would be adaptively reused as condos. And so it was divided into 4 different condo units. Can't tell from the street. And since then, the 2 upstairs condos have been combined back into 1 unit. So now it's a triplex. And you know, the person who lives in this right behind the front door in the hallway has, you know, hand-painted wallpaper and murals in the dining room. It's really a spectacular house. So that was the first example. The William Fields house in Greensboro downtown, 1984, preserved by Greensboro Preservation Society, which was kind of connected to Preservation Greensboro today. And another downtown building was preserved around the same time, 1985. Some of you can see Vernon in the top of the building and assume that that's named for a man named Vernon. It was built by a fellow named Armfield. We have Armfields here in High Point, but it was not named for a man named Vernon. It was built for a woman named Vernon, Virginia Vernon, who moved to Greensboro from Charlotte. She was widowed, and her investment was to buy this pre-existing building. She renovated it, and she put her name at the top of the building. So just because it has a name at the top doesn't mean it's a man. Woman too, but preserved by preservation easement. Mary Elizabeth Ragsdale, who many of us remember, in Jamestown. Her address was Mary Elizabeth Ragsdale, Magnolia House, Magnolia Farm, Jamestown. And that's all she needed to write. But she owned the McCullough Gold Mill, built in the 1820s, 1830s, and sold it through Preservation North Carolina with an easement. It was also a tax credit project, and today it's the most tangible and architecturally romantic illustrations of the North Carolina gold rush in our state. The Lau House in eastern Guilford County, restored by Jerry Nitz, got an easement placed on it by Jerry in 1986. It's representative of the German culture in the eastern part of our county. This house had to be relocated so that Burlington could build their reservoir, and it is now protected. Then in 1992, a crazy 22-year-old, 23-year-old felt that the house that he had put a lot of his time and energy into restoring on Johnson Street was vulnerable to demolition for a parking lot. And so he moved forward, and that was me with Barbara Wishy, who worked with PNC at the time, and put a preservation easement on that house in '92 in order to save it. And that easement has worked very well. Right after I finished restoring it, and Dorothy Dar had it on the market, trying to sell it, I got a phone call from a neighbor, and they said, "Oh, we're calling to ask about the house and how much it would cost to buy it." And I told them the price, and I said, "Well, you should know that it's got a preservation easement on it." And they said, "Oh, what's a preservation easement?" I said, "Well, it denies demolition in perpetuity." And they said, "Oh, well, we probably need to know that. I'll put a note of that and put it in the file." So it sort of warded off that demolition threat. I asked them, what are your plans? They said, "We might put a daycare in there for the short term, but long term it would be a parking lot. We're going to knock it down." It's still there. It's 2024 and it's still there. And then in the back is a 2,400 square foot carriage house. And when Lexington Furniture owned the building, they came to the Preservation Commission and said, we're so sorry, but we haven't really kept up this carriage house. We haven't done painting. We haven't put a roof on it. It needs a lot of work, and we just rather destroy it, knock it down. It's one of the last surviving urban carriage houses in North Carolina, according to Catherine Weischer. And so I went to the Preservation Commission meeting, and they were like, oh, what can we do? We can't stop demolition. We can only delay it. So, they were deliberating and everything. And then I was there, and I said, this has an easement on it, right? And they said, what? And I said, a preservation easement. So you've got to get permission to destroy anything, or you can do that. And so I went back to staff, and staff called up PNC, and PNC said, you're right, there is an easement on it. And so today that carriage house still stands at the back of that property. It absolutely, the house and the carriage house would have been gone had it not been for the easement. I have no doubt on that. So anyway, now Gloria lives there, and poor Gloria has to live in a house that the president and CEO of Preservation North Carolina restored, put an easement on it. So talk about scrutiny and pressure. The eyes of the president and CEO are on you, Gloria. And you're okay with that, I know. Then in 1994, Dorothy and Joey Darr put an easement on the O. Arthur Kirkman house. My favorite factoid about O. Arthur Kirkman is that he was born Arthur O. Kirkman, but he switched his first and second name around so that his initials were Oak, because he has these beautiful oak trees in the yard. And he wanted to be in like an oak, a strong, never bending force in the community. And then he renamed the side street Oak Street after himself. So Oak. So O. Arthur Kirkman House. So many feet of stained glass inside. Original unpainted wood. I mean, it really is a treasure. Skylight in the hallway. It's absolutely amazing, but very much under pressure. Had it not been for Dorothy buying that house, more than likely there would be a 6-story showroom building on that site. But it's got an easement on it. In Greensboro, the year 2000, the Crest building was restored. One of the most amazing Crest Art Deco facades, one of the first ones. Considered by many the most elaborate in the United States, the Crest Building 2000. Then, when my mom was selling the house that I grew up in at 1101 Greenway Drive in Emerywood, we recognized that this is a little house for Emerywood. There are a lot bigger houses in Emerywood. It's on a prime location on Forest Hill and Greenway. This house didn't even have air conditioning when Mom sold it. Somebody would knock that down. It's just a little Welsh-style cottage built out of bricks that were salvaged from a house up on Winston-Salem Road, 311, north in Forsyth County, in 1926. Somebody would tear that down and build a bigger, grander, taller house that would have more of a stage presence on an intersection in Emerywood. So Mom agreed to put an easement on it when she sold it. And, it mentions the cut glass front door, the ancient brick, the terrace, all of these architectural features, the slate roof. It even recalls the trees that you see poking up in the back, that somebody just can't come in willy-nilly and chop all that down. And so today, that's what it looked like when Mom sold it, all the way down to the flag. It still very much looks the same today, thanks to a preservation easement. Nettie Brown. Nettie was a widow when she built this house. Her husband was a doctor who was killed on the railroad tracks in downtown when he passed between two boxcars and didn't hear the train coming the other direction and was hit by the train. But she built this spectacular house, originally on High Street, and Dorothy worked hard to save it. It was threatened with demolition for a showroom. And she moved it to Oak Street, right behind her house. So it's an example, 2011, of another property that's preserved today through PNC with an easement. The house Boxwood in College Hill, 2021. Betty Cohn, many of you know Betty Cohn in Greensboro. She put the easement on this house when they sold it. And they sold it to a group of investors who all grew up with each other in India. And they moved to New Jersey. And they became interested in collecting property and managing property. And they found out about Greensboro through, they had a property in Danville. And so I met with them last March, and they are thrilled about Greensboro, and they want to move to North Carolina. And, they called up and said, what do we need to do about this easement? And all the, who do I get permission to change things? I said, well, good news, bad news. The good news is that your house has an easement on it. It's on the National Register, so it has tax credits. It's in the local historic district, and it's a Guilford County landmark. So your house is really loved. People really, really, really like your house. The challenge is that you've got to get permission from all those entities to get your tax credits and permissions and everything. However, there is a hierarchy in which Preservation North Carolina works with the Park Service. So what the Park Service approves, we review, and we try to not be in conflict. We don't want for us to say one thing and the Park Service contrasts. So we want to work together on all that. But 2021, not too long ago, you all know the Brummel's Inn, right, out West Lexington extension. Well, last year we got an easement on that when that property sold. Incredibly important property for Davidson County. I think the corner of the stone in the chimney says 1817, if my memory serves me right. But with a stagecoach inn on the trail. But will be preserved with a preservation easement in perpetuity. Last year we saved the Gordon store. We bought that through surplus property through the town of Summerfield. It will now be Airbnb on the second floor. Cat-a-corner across the street from that in Summerfield is Alexander Martin Strong House, the illegitimate son of Governor Alexander Martin in Summerfield. And who knows what 2024 will bring. We're working on lots of easements. We're working on an exciting project in Thomasville, which I can't talk about, which kills me. Talking to a property owner in Sedgefield, talking to two property owners in Greensboro. Who knows what will come in the future, but it's exciting to look at how we can preserve these properties in perpetuity. That's really the bread and butter of what Preservation North Carolina does that I'm most proud about, is having that last defense. Remember, National Register, local landmarks, local historic district sites can be destroyed. Easements, it can be destroyed by fire or tornado, but it's not going to be as easy to destroy them. So that's half of our organization is our Endangered Properties Program. The other half of the organization has fun events. I'll talk about the Coker House event on June 9th in Chapel Hill and Bellamy Mansion. We own and operate Bellamy Mansion in Wilmington as an historic house museum. Our conference, downsizing. We used to meet in place like last year it was Durham. I want to be in the smaller communities that actually have a more challenging story to tell. Durham was awfully expensive, but Rocky Mount's not expensive, and Rocky Mount has a fascinating story. And the wave of historic preservation is a little bit late coming to Rocky Mount. They have the Rocky Mount Mill, where will be the headquarters of our conference. But there are so many neighborhoods, buildings in downtown that haven't been restored yet. It's a fascinating story, and then we're going to do, on the last day of the tour on Friday, we're going to be in Tarboro, which is old town with a town common right on the Tar River, and many of the fantastic houses and churches will be open on that tour in October. We'll be meeting in an amazing house in Gastonia in November, and this morning we're announcing that we're doing a PNC trip to San Miguel de Allende. Has anybody heard of San Miguel in Mexico? All the hipsters are going there right now. It turns out like 10% of the population of San Miguel, which is an artist community, very strong in the arts. About 10% are American expats. I was there over Easter, and it was lovely. It was wonderful. The food was great. The weather, the people were super nice. I had to drive my colleague had lost her license and misplaced it, not lost it legally, but misplaced it. Couldn't rent a car, so I had to drive all over. But on our tour, they won't have to drive. We'll have a very small tour on coach. And we also have an internship now our intern starts next week, who will help us in monitoring these properties across the state. I want to challenge High Point. We built this exhibit was created during COVID. I was on the board of PNC at the time. Myrick sort of pitched this idea of celebrating North Carolina's black architects and builders. And he made this announcement on Zoom on the board meeting, and it was crickets. And I was moved. I said, I think it's a great idea. And somebody said, well, I wonder if this isn't going to divert from money from the organization. I think this is going to bring more money to the organization, more relevance to the organization. So the ball started rolling in the direction of approving it. It obviously was approved. But I'm very proud of the selection of properties and architects and black builders. Here's Bellamy Mansion, the contributions there. Mid-century modern is included in the later. It's all chronological. It's been in Greensboro now. It was at A&T right after it was done. It's been in Winston-Salem now. It's been in Charlotte. It's been in Salisbury, Raleigh. It's in Edenton, or Elizabeth City right now. Well, it's going to Wilmington next. But let's bring it to High Point. We need to celebrate. This is like our big chance to celebrate architecture, place, black history, black design, professionalism. This is an important narrative that black people built North Carolina before 1960. That's just the truth. If there weren't builders out there, these buildings and sites would not have been built, and they wouldn't have been built with the expertise and the skill. So wherever it lands in High Point, let's try to get it to High Point. We need to get that story out in our community as well. And I talked about the Coker House, 1908 Coker House is in Chapel Hill, where if you want to be a member of PNC, you can join. You get it's $50 per person, and that includes a one-year membership, but it also includes a glass of wine and some nibbles. And the pictures online are the outside of the house, which is spectacular. You know, it's in Chapel Hill, so it's got the boulders in the front yard and everything. It's really beautiful. But I was in the house last year, and that's what the inside looks like. You all get a sneak preview of the inside. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, wow. And the sun was coming in through the big window and everything. So, you know, it's on a Sunday afternoon, 3 to 5. You could do a little trip, and I joke with everybody, if we're with other fellow preservationists and we're in an old house and we got a glass of wine in our hand, we're happy. You know, that's our happy place. But you can be in this house and look at that stone chimney. But the whole house will be open. Owners are incredibly proud. They just restored it, not that it was in bad shape. Redid the gardens. It's absolutely amazing. So, and if you know of anybody that would benefit from being a member of PNC, would enjoy it, would enjoy our actions. We currently have in High Point 4 members. I'm one, Dorothy's one, and we have 2 others who are private citizens. Dorothy knows that I can pick on her a little bit. That's it, 4 for High Point. You know, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, they're in the 70s, 80s. Charlotte, up that high, Raleigh, 4 in High Point. So when people talk about where are you from, I say, well, you know, we'll get our membership up in High Point. If you're interested in contacting somebody about a preservation easement, you can either contact me, and I will direct you to Kathleen Turner, or you can contact Kathleen directly, but she's the Piedmont Regional Director. Her territory includes Guilford County. But if you'd just like to learn about it, you have a neighbor, you have your own house that you're like, I wonder if an easement would be appropriate for preserving this house as part of my personal strategy. I told my nephew, Chris, who is will be the executor of my estate, I said, Chris, if you don't put a preservation easement on my house when I die, I will haunt you so hard. So he said, oh, he was joking. He said, oh, it's going to be apartments when you're gone. So I might go ahead and put an easement on it. Nothing against Chris, but I might go ahead and put an easement on it now. My house is historic, and I don't want to see it torn down. So that's kind of a sneak peek into what my world is. It's a lot of preservation easements and a lot of advocacy and a lot of we're trying to do some fun events. I'm trying to make it fun. It is fun to be in historic preservation. I mean, it's a blast. I've had a wonderful time with it my entire professional life. So it is fun, but we can make it funner. We can make it more fun. By having events. And preservation is relevant, and we can make it more relevant by preserving sites through preservation easements. So I thank you all for your attention. It's so nice to talk to a High Point group and talk about all the sites that I'm familiar with. Did we want to try to have any questions, if anybody has a question about something? Yes?
So I heard Myrick Howard speak at the Greensboro History Museum.
Yes.
So I know you have big shoes to fill. He talked about the mid-century modern, how important it is to preserve those. You didn't mention any easements on mid-century modern. So are any of those in the works?
Yes. Yeah. So I can't divulge until they're actually done.
Okay.
We don't, at this moment in time, have any mid-century modern in Guilford County. Mid-century modern are vulnerable because they're, you know, the designs were very progressive. They had big windows that had brought the indoors outdoors, right, and the outdoors indoors. So their context is very important because they were often built on very large lots that had lots of beautiful trees and lawns and vistas. Well, today developers look at those wooded areas and big yards as cul-de-sacs. Yeah, so in places like Raleigh and Charlotte, we have seen a great loss of modernist housing because those larger lots are primed for denser development. And we're any day now we will receive an easement on a modernist house in Salisbury that will just have the exterior protected. So around the state we are seeing them, but not yet in Guilford County. But I think we'll see a change maybe in 2024 or 2025 on that. So yes, they're very important. I'm a big fan of modernism. Any other questions about it? Well, thank you so much for coming, and good to see you all again.